Dan Umphress' career has spanned some of the largest fleets in the country, but it all began somewhere much smaller.
I was born in Ottumwa, Iowa, and I was raised in a little town called Eldon, Iowa. Eldon has a claim to fame. It is the town where the house is that Grant Woods painted his famous American Gothic painting at.
Dan was the third of 4 boys. His family raced harness horses, and his dad could fix just about anything.
He just was mechanical. He just was perceptive. He was just quick at that kind of stuff. And so at a very young age, I learned that if it's broke, you can't break it. It's already broke. So I got to be where I wasn't afraid to tear something apart. If it didn't work, or I wanted to know how it worked, I'd tear it apart and then put it back together.
It's hard to imagine now, but school wasn't where Dan excelled early on.
I was a 4D and 2F student through the 8th grade. All I cared about was having fun and telling jokes and being the class clown. That was my goal until 9th grade. And I walked into school in 9th grade and it was time to go to work. It was go time.
By high school, Dan had turned things around, earning perfect grades and attendance, while still finding time to play the guitar, compete in football and wrestling, and run more than 20 miles a week. After high school, Dan's drive carried him forward, and he toured a local community college offering diesel mechanic classes.
And I said, man, I love them diesel trucks. I'm all about it. So I signed up and I took a job while I went to diesel mechanic school with a fleet in Packwood, Iowa called Dickey Transport. So I was learning how things worked and I was learning how to work at the same time. And it was an awesome experience. I couldn't have done it any better than to have both.
After earning an associate's degree in applied science, Dan shifted his focus from diesel trucks to a lifelong partnership that had been years in the making.
Sherry moved into the school that I went to when she was 9 years old. We were always very comfortable together. We just had a lot of fun together. In 1977, we started dating. And in 1980, we were married. We're still married today, 46 years later.
A young Dan Umphress was now married and educated. The next thing he needed was a job. His first post-college job was at International Harvester, but a sudden bankruptcy forced Dan to seek work far from home.
So a bunch of my buddies was going to go to Houston, Texas, looking for work. Oil boom time, and there's a lot of work in Houston, Texas. So they come to me and said, hey, you want to go? I said, sure. We got down there, and first thing I did was pick up a newspaper and see that Ruan Leasing was advertising for diesel mechanics. So I went down, applied, and the manager says, you're from Iowa and you've worked for International Harvester? You can work for Ruan. So I called my wife and I said, I have a job. And the tears just fly, right? And I said, what'd you think I come down here for? And she said, I thought you guys were gonna go down there and get drunk. You were gonna call me for money for gas to come home. And I said, there's no work at home. I've got a job. This is where I'll be. And she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, pack up the house, rent it out, fit everything you can fit in the Monte Carlo, and come on down. And that's what she did.
In Houston, Dan started in a small Ruan shop servicing sleeper tractors, but his time as a mechanic would be brief.
The next thing I know, the manager of that facility, he got himself in trouble with the company and they fired him. So the customer, Airco, went to Ruan and said, if you don't give this job to Dan, we're pulling the contract. We're backing out. And so the district manager for Ruan came in and said, we'd like to offer you the job as manager of this facility. I'm really not that long out of trade school. I haven't twisted wrenches as a mechanic really all that long. and suddenly I'm the manager.
As a division operations manager at Ruan, Dan learned the realities of fleet management, which included moving, on average, every 8 months for a decade.
And I opened shops, I closed shops, I cleaned up shops, shops that weren't running well. I became a troubleshooter, and Ruan and I we parted ways. We had a disagreement over staffing formulas for shops. I said they should be more, and they said they should be less. At the end of the conversation, it resulted in me picking up my notebook, if you will, my clipboard, and going home.
During his years at Ruan and all the moves that came with it, Dan and Sherry welcomed a new addition to their lives.
And so Brad was born in '84 in Tyler, Texas.
And living with my dad was pretty awesome, actually. He likes to do stuff. He likes to learn stuff. He likes to dig into things and explore.
And sometimes Brad ended up right in the middle of whatever Dan was trying to figure out.
I can remember being a kid and they had been doing some work on a shop, and he apparently tried to wire some phones. And for the record, my dad's colorblind. And they just couldn't understand why they weren't getting any phone calls. And as a kid, I remember going down with my mom and my dad on a weekend and sitting through and telling my dad what color what wire was so that he could rewire the phones that he wired wrong in the shop so that they could start getting phone calls again for the rest of the week. So I remember that one, and I was very young for it. I would not ever call him if you want to rewire the phones in your house or run anything that relies on identifying color. Don't let him pick the drapes. Don't let him pick the color of your house, because he's going to tell you it's blue and it's going to come out pink.
Dan's next chapter brought him to Arkansas Freightways, where the company placed their most troubled shops on his plate. One of their biggest challenges, a chaotic facility in Chicago, was now his to fix.
I go to Chicago, I can't even get on the yard. There's trailers plugging up the whole lot. I walk in the shop and they're playing cards. And I said, "What's going on with all these trailers?" And they said, "We don't know." I said, "What do you mean you don't know?" I said, "Okay, who's gonna come with me to figure out what's wrong with these trailers?" "Well, we're not gonna do that." And I said, "Okay, so anybody that doesn't wanna come with me to figure out what's wrong with these trailers, you can pack your toolbox and leave now." So I went out and started inspecting trailers to find out what was wrong with them. And by the time I got back in the shop, everybody was gone. So I put an ad in the paper, hired a manager, hired mechanics, and it took about 6-8 months, and I had that shop standing back up again. And that's when Arkansas Freightways VP of maintenance called me and says, "You need to come to the corporate office. We want you to be our director of maintenance." I was just doing what I'd always done, right? Find problems, identify them, put it back together.
Even while cleaning house and turning struggling shops around, Dan remained committed to his family, mentoring his son and a group of young scouts.
Cub Scouts is mother and son. And about 10 years old, he moved to Boy Scouts. And so Sherry said, "Your turn." So after my son joined the troop, they talked me into becoming Scoutmaster. I was Scoutmaster for about 5 years. I was having a blast. These kids, I took a lot of them camping for their first time in their lives.
We canoed and hiked across Canada for 70 miles, and we loved it so much we went and did it twice. And that really put me in a place that I realized was pretty awesome as a kid to have. I got to spend a lot of time with my dad.
And in that 5 years, I got about 23 boys to Eagle Scout. And I earned the Presidential Award of Merit as a Scoutmaster.
While Dan was shaping young lives as a Scoutmaster, his work at Arkansas Freightways, later American Freightways, was also drawing attention of one of the industry's biggest players.
American Freightways was purchased by a company out of Memphis, Tennessee called FedEx, and we became FedEx Freight.
FedEx named Dan Managing Director of Vehicle Solutions, overseeing 3 acquired companies and everything needed to keep their fleets running smoothly.
So spec their trucks, buy their trucks, sell the used trucks, parts, tires, fuel, oils, lubes, coolants, file warranty claims, everything that would support all of those companies. So I did that.
At FedEx, Dan's work touched tens of thousands of assets and more than 1,000 technicians. But what mattered most to him wasn't scale, it was making the operation safer.
I put LED lights on all the trailers at FedEx Freight before it was cool. I did it way early. And I had a lot of people ask me, why did you do this? And all I had to do was have an engineer tell me that when it comes to putting LED lights in the stop, tail, and turn position on a trailer, those LEDs will light up when you hit the brakes a nanosecond quicker than an incandescent bulb. And at 60 mile an hour, a nanosecond is about 20 feet. It's a winner. Well, the lights last longer, they got a longer warranty, all these things, bonus for me. I'm about the safety part of it.
As Dan was managing one of the largest fleets in the country, his schedule grew demanding. However, Sherry reminded him that even with work piling up, he needed to make time for his teenage son.
She said, that boy's gonna grow up and you're gonna be sorry if you don't spend this time with him at this age. And she said, I'm gonna be sorry because he's gonna get into stuff that he shouldn't be into. She said, I think we've done a good job with him to here. I think we got to get him over the top. And I said, well, what are you thinking? And she said, well, you've got all your tools at home from when you were a mechanic twisting wrenches. Why don't you guys rebuild an old car? And I said, well, you just remember one thing. And she said, what's that? And I said, it was your idea. And from there, we went.
The father and son duo got to work on rebuilding a classic 1968 Camaro.
We spent most of my teenage years building that car, and then I went into the military. Got deployed overseas. And when I came home while I was overseas, he actually took the car and got it painted, and when I came home, we put it together.
So we're in the basement. And he hit the key and it started first turn. And so the car's sitting there rumbling, and his eyes get big as boulders. And he says, Dad, what's that sound? I said, it's a Camaro running. And he jumps up, runs upstairs to tell his mom the Camaro's running, like she didn't know. And she starts screaming, because there's dishes and stuff falling off of shelves, shut it off! Now for me, the whole project was done. It was worth it for me to see his eyes and see how he had done with this project. But that car will be part of our lives. It's part of the family now.
With their project complete and Brad stepping into his 20s, Dan wrapped up his 9-year run at FedEx amid some consolidation. In his final career move, Dan would become the corporate manager of fleet services for one of the largest grocery fleets in the country at Kroger. His first problem to solve? Modernizing their equipment lifecycle.
I like to say the life cycle for Kroger fleet equipment when I came was till death do we part. So maintenance cost was high because the equipment was very, very old, but I knew that if I wanted to do what I had done at other fleets, I needed more capital. I was going to have to establish a life cycle in the fleet.
To convince Kroger to invest, Dan needed proof.
So I just pulled the maintenance history data straight out of the system, and I come up with the cost to maintain and the MPG on a 1-year-old truck, a 2-year-old truck, a 3-year-old truck, 4-year-old truck, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years. And I knew I had gold, right? Because a 1-year-old truck has a lower maintenance cost and higher fuel economy than a 12-year-old truck. And it was that easy. The company funded me. They funded what I was recommending. The payback's been amazing.
He was able to present the case to our corporate team, the C-suite, why this should happen, because up until that point, they just did not see the value in exchanging the equipment on a regular basis. And once you can show the ROI, it just made dollars and cents, which is, I'm assuming over time, probably millions of dollars just in saved expenses, just for keeping new stuff on the road and taking the old stuff out.
Kroger threw multiple challenges at Dan. As the company expanded into home delivery, a new problem emerged.
I've said all my life that I'm really not a very smart guy, but I know a lot of smart guys. I started taking my contact list and reaching out to people and just making phone calls until I found people that would help me and direct me. I wound up working with 3 different manufacturers on building this body, and they all had ideas they brought to the table, and I just took the best of those ideas. And so we come up with this cab and chassis. It's less than 10,000 pound GVWR. We put a body on the back that is insulated. We add a refrigeration unit to it. So half of the body is refrigerated, half of it is ambient, and we're able to load from the back, and then the drivers, as they make deliveries, will unload off the side. So they can access the refrigerated portion, they can access the ambient portion, and then deliver the groceries to the customer's door.
Dan's a unicorn because he came up through the ranks. He knows how to turn the wrenches, but more importantly, he knows how to organize a group to a task. Dan is a very collaborative, not only internal to Kroger, but he's well connected in the industry and has a vast network of individuals to lean on to where he doesn't have to come up with that exact answer himself.
How's that thing drive?
Drives good.
Dan built a vast network of contacts in part by attending TMC, creating connections that he could rely on throughout his career.
So by going to TMC, I got to meet people I would have never met. That means I have people I can call.
Dan got involved from his very first visit, steadily rising through the ranks, earning a Silver Spark Plug Award, and ultimately serving as General Chairman in 2014. His biggest accomplishment? Helping new people get involved.
I worked a lot with the first-timers and new people that came in, trying to get them to get involved. And a lot of the people that I worked with and mentored into that process went on to make Silver Spark Plug, recognized associates. A lot of those people have done really, really well with giving back to TMC.
The root of him is he lives to invest in people. When he does something that people say is too far reaching and it can't be done, and he not only makes that happen, but he makes people grow and become successful themselves from it. That's what he finds reward in.
Brad has also been shaped by Dan's influence, having spent more than 20 years in the trucking industry, now serving as district manager for Great Dane. That same influence is evident across the teams and leaders that Dan has helped develop at Kroger.
You know, you get home, you share your day with your wife. My wife has seen all the different bosses I work for. She's seen the days I come home where I feel like I'm defeated and I can't do enough to satisfy my boss. And there have been multiple times where my wife is just, when I talk about things, she said, he's one of the best bosses you've ever worked for. And she's even shared the changes she's seen, not just professionally, but I've been able to take some of that stuff and help roll it over into leading my family. I want to say thank you because Dan has helped me grow.
Dan's life began in a small town in Iowa, far from the large fleets he would one day oversee. From turning wrenches in local shops to solving complex challenges and innovating new solutions, he rose to the pinnacle of fleet management. Through it all, he raised a family, guided colleagues, and quietly shaped their careers. His impact just isn't measured in vehicles or facilities, it's seen in the people he's supported and the systems he's improved. Looking back on it all, his parting advice is simple.
You know, this industry has been great to me. And really, I think the secret to my success is, again, not that I'm the smartest guy in the room, and it's not all about me, right? I've met a lot of great people. I've had support from a lot of great people. I've supported, people when I seen that I could help. I strongly believe you get what you give, and so give often.